If you thought making good pizza at home is difficult, let me prove you wrong. Watch this video where I'll show you how to turn a few ingredients into a delicious pizza with the simplest tools and technique. This recipe will focus on Neapolitan style, the original style of pizza, using water, yeast, flour, and salt topped with tomato and cheese with basil leaves and some olive oil. This style originates from the 1600s and began as a poor man's food. Let's get to it, shall we? I'm going to use the pizza app with metric settings, but you can modify the recipe to suit your preferences. For a standard 12-inch or 30-centimeter pizza, we need a 270-gram dough ball. So I measured out 165 grams of flour, 100 grams of icy water, 5 grams of salt, and 0.16 grams of active dry yeast. If you don't have a jewelry scale, 0.16 grams is basically a pinch. Caputo 00 flour is the most popular choice and widely available around the world, but this recipe also works with bread or regular flour. Today, I'm using bread flour and 12 hours of proofing time at room temperature. If your room temp is higher than 24 Celsius or 75 Fahrenheit, then use the fridge for proofing, but adjust the app settings accordingly. Longer fermentation time results in a lighter, more flavorful dough, but requires a strong, good quality pizza flour. So if you are a beginner, start with 12 to 24 hours max proofing time. Add the flour, water, and yeast to a bowl and start mixing them together. Leave the salt to the end to help the hydration process. Start with a spoon, then transition to hand mixing. Make sure all the ingredients are fully incorporated. This process should not take longer than 10 minutes. The warmth of your hands and the mixing will heat up the dough, which activates the yeast. But too much heat would make it too active. We don't want that. That's why we use icy water. This way, the small amount of yeast will slowly raise the dough and form a nice and strong gluten network without extensive kneading. Just before you feel like it's ready, add the salt and some olive oil and incorporate them in. When it's smooth and you no longer feel the salt with your hands, cover the ball and let it rest for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, place the dough to the counter and stretch it as wide as you can. This is called lamination, which helps gluten network formation. When it is stretched to the maximum, fold it together and form it back into a ball. If you're making more than one pizza, then it's time to portion out and form the 270-gram balls. When the balls are ready, place them into a floured-out container or a tray. Oil up the ball's surface a bit to prevent drying out. Cover them and let them rise overnight. Since most people don't have a wood-fired oven in their kitchen, we're going to use a regular oven to bake our pizza. Built-in ovens run around 500 Fahrenheit or 250 Celsius max, which is much less than in a wood-fired. In those ovens, pizzas are ready in 2 minutes. We're going to cook ours for 6 to 7 minutes. If you have a pizza stone or a pizza steel, then you can use that. Steel is a lot better in accumulating and transferring heat to bake a crispy bottom, while stone is more like an insulator, so I don't recommend you to buy a pizza stone. If you don't have any of those, you can use a few small bricks, a concrete tile, or a flipped baking tray. I'm using a piece of sheet metal which was gifted from a friend. Whatever you choose, place it close to the top heating element, but not too close, and start preheating the oven on max temp at least an hour before baking. Don't worry if you don't have a pizza peel, a cardboard, and a piece of baking paper will do just as fine. I'll show you when we get to it. Back to the recipe. About 11 hours have passed since we made the dough. It's time to prepare for the baking. While the oven is preheating, chop up the cheese for finger-sized pieces. If you use buffalo, let it drain out to a kitchen towel to prevent flooding your pizza during baking. For tomato sauce, Moody is the best choice in my opinion, but any good quality thick tomato sauce can do. You don't necessarily need to buy whole canned Sun Marzano. You can flavor your sauce with basil, oregano, garlic, and salt, but I prefer not to add anything to it. Apart from these, you're going to need some fresh basil leaves, some extra virgin olive oil, and some pecorino or Parmesan cheese for flavor, and we are set to go. For stretching, I'm using a mix of semolina and flour, but you can use just flour or just semolina or cornstarch. So I've poured some stretching mixture into a pie tray. This way I can easily rotate the pie during stretching, which makes it a lot easier. You can use any flat-bottom bowl on your hands, or just simply do it on the counter. Now we have our dough ball, nicely puffed up. Start by sprinkling it with some of the stretching mixture. Use a spatula to gently loosen the dough. Once it's loose, slide the spatula underneath with a single motion and flip the dough into the semolina. It may be a little deformed, so shape it back into a round form with your hands before flipping it back to its original side. Don't be shy with the flour. Once it's flipped, begin pushing the air from the center outwards to form a flat middle and an airy crust. It helps to rotate the entire pan while shaping the dough. Pinch out any large air bubbles that appear, as they'll burn and pop during baking. After you've formed the base, transfer it to the counter and slap the dough a couple of times to remove any excess semolina while continuing to stretch it. To stretch, hold the dough on one side with one hand and grab the other side with your other hand. Gently pull it, then slap the dough. Lift it up, give it a quarter turn, slap it back down, and repeat this process until you reach your desired size. There are other stretching methods out there. Experiment and find the one that works best for you. Now that we've got a nice, roundish pizza base, place it on a sheet of baking paper. Add a generous amount of tomato sauce to the center and spread it out in circular motions. I'm using about 80 grams of sauce for this pizza. For extra flavor and crispiness, drizzle a little olive oil over the sauce. I prefer to trim any excess baking paper before baking to make things easier, but that's totally optional. Now grab a baking tray or a stronger piece of cardboard. Slide the pizza onto it by gently pulling the paper and transfer it to the preheated oven. If you have a pizza peel, feel free to use that. Next, switch your oven to the grill function and pre-bake the base for 2 to 3 minutes. This step helps the dough cook evenly and prevents the cheese from burning later. After 2 to 3 minutes, carefully grab the pizza by the paper or use a spatula to remove it from the oven. Now grate some Pecorino Romano cheese over the pizza to give it a punchy, salty flavor. If you don't have Pecorino, Grana Padano, or Parmesan works well too. If you're using plain tomato sauce, this is also the time to sprinkle on some dried oregano and a pinch of garlic powder if desired. For extra flavor, I prefer placing the basil leaves under the mozzarella cheese before baking. This helps the basil infuse the pizza with a richer aroma. However, you can always add the basil after baking if you prefer. Now add about 80 to 100 grams of cheese, distributing it evenly around the base. The last step before baking is to brush some olive oil on the crust. This will help the crust stay moist and golden without drying out during baking. Now return the pizza to the oven and bake until it's finished. This should only take another 2 to 3 minutes. And there you have it, a Neapolitan-style Margherita pizza made right in your kitchen. Crispy and airy crust with fresh, flavorful toppings. This Margherita pizza is a great starting point, and you can easily experiment with different topping variations. If you like this recipe, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and let me know how your pizza turned out in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Enjoy your pizza. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.